ES Audio.
Hello everyone, I'm Lawrence Dallaglio. Welcome to the Rugby podcast. Well, what a weekend. The Six Nations and the Gallagher Premiership were both back in full swing, so there's plenty for us to talk about. But before we do that, let me introduce my guests this week, starting with our special guest. I'm delighted to welcome someone who has many strings to her bow. Not only is she a radio and TV broadcaster and well-known maths genius, but she also holds a pilot's license and is an honorary RAF group captain. But over and above all of that, she's a passionate Wales rugby fan. It is, of course, Carol Vorderman. Carol, welcome.
You can call me Mum, now you've mentioned the honorary group captain.
Dame, I think, would be better. I'm assuming you were at the Principality Stadium on Friday night?
Friday night. I wasn't sure whether I'd still have a voice left for my radio show the next day, to be honest. I was screaming and screaming and screaming. And that was the thing about the weekend. Even in Twickenham, you know, the atmosphere was extraordinary. And it was, obviously, it always is in Cardiff, in Cardiff. But it was extra special because the quality of the rugby was so high.
Yeah, I agree with that. And listen, we're going to talk to you a bit more about your evenings in Cardiff very shortly. But I just got to introduce my other guest from the Evening Standard and joining the podcast for the very first time. It is sports journalist Matt Magendie. Matt, hello to you. I'm assuming that is a French name. Does that mean that you are qualified to play rugby for France?
Sadly not, neither qualified nor good enough, but you've pronounced the name perfectly, so spot on, and thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. And from Folk on the Falcons podcast, it's a big welcome to Newcastle Falcons fan, Philip Mundy. Philip, I'm assuming you're a Geordie, or are you just you're a non-Geordie living in Geordie land?
No, I'm down in London now. I've been here for a good few years, and my podcast host, I actually used to play with back at home in Newcastle. And then he was a housemate in London. He went back after COVID, and then we thought, let's do a podcast to keep chatting about the games.
Do you always have an angel over your head?
No, it's a family Christmas present. They throw all the patriotic northeastern stuff at me when I move down here.
Oh, I thought that's just because you're well behaved. So don't worry. Now, we're going to talk about the Six Nations action. I'd love to hear where everyone was at the weekend. But Carol, first of all, I want to find out a little bit more from you about your love of the game. Every time I see you on social media, you're wearing red. So you are the most passionate Welsh rugby fan. And there you are, special rugby podcast top. Now, apparently it's rugby that sort of gave you a bit of a inkling into getting your TV job on Countdown. What's the story there then?
Okay, so I grew up in North Wales. I'm a Welsh girl. You know, my clan is the Davis clan, and all the family's still back up there. But in North Wales, back because I was born in 1960, I've been around for a few years, and back then rugby in North Wales wasn't a thing. It was always football, always football. Boys in school, in real, it was always football. And so I never got introduced to rugby, really, weirdly, growing up in Wales, until I then somehow or other went from a comp on free school meals to Cambridge to do engineering. I read engineering there. So in my second summer, I worked underground in Snowdonia. It's now called the Electric Mountain. So it's this massive hydroelectric scheme where we exploded basically this enormous cavern inside the mountain. There's a lake at the top, lake at the bottom. And I was working underground with 2,000 men. I was the only woman under there. And my boss, I was 19, Lawrence, and he was called Andy Fraser, and he was 24. Ooh. And he was 6'6", played second row for Headingley back then, obviously amateur. So Andy and I kind of fell in love and all of this. And so once I graduated, he was Yorkshireman. I used to go up to Headingley, and I said to my mum, right, got to go and live in Leeds. So we bought this house in Leeds. Long story short. And because of Andy, because of rugby, because of all of that. And then 3 weeks later, she saw the advert for Countdown in the local paper in Leeds, wrote an application, forged my signature and sent it in. And that's how I got on Countdown.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
I get through rugby.
Now, I'm surprised, actually, if you moved to Leeds, that you didn't you weren't sort of kidnapped by rugby league and go and support, I don't know, the Leeds Rhinos.
Well, back then, rugby league was so much faster than union, and it was really exciting to watch, to be perfectly honest. But because Andy played for Yorkshire, and Ian McGeechan was the coach back then, Peter Winterbottom played for Headingley in Yorkshire as well, and all of that, and obviously England. I just kind of got into that, really. So it was during the 1980s was my first sort of foray into rugby, ironically being Welsh.
Well, I mean, having followed rugby on TV in those days, I mean, the Welsh were the best team, one of the best teams in the world, if not, and certainly had some of the very best players, you know, the Barry John, the Gareth Edwards, the Mervyn Davis, all of those guys. Amazing team. And just staying on the Yorkshire theme then, Ian McGeechan, you mentioned that, Sir Ian McGeechan now, one of the very best coaches that I've had the privilege and pleasure to play under. He was my coach at Wasps towards the end of my career, but obviously the British and Irish Lions, it was just amazing. His speech and his speeches go down in history, really. And anyone who hasn't listened to them, get on YouTube and listen to them, because he is one of the few coaches and orators who can actually deliver something so powerful and so real without swearing as well. And although he can swear too, but he's I think he leaves most of the swearing to Jim Telfer, his assistant. But how did your paths cross with Sir Ian then?
Well, it was really because of he was a coach at Headingley Rugby Union at the time. And I reached the giddy heights. I was in my early 20s, the giddy heights of the assistant social secretary at Headingley.
Very important job.
Basically, I helped with the teams on a Saturday afternoon. And I mean, you know, he wasn't like a big buddy or anything. But then later in the 1980s, I was filming out in Australia. And I was there for a long time, like 6 months or something, and doing a big travel series for BBC. And there's a big gang of us there, and a lot of them worked for the Queensland Tourist Board, Northern Territories Tourist Board, and so on. And we used to fly to places and film. It was like a job from heaven, really. And we were in Cairns. This was 1989. We were in Cairns, and the lads, the film crew and everything, said, "Oh, right, we're going." I can't do an Aussie accent. We're going. All right, Carol. We're going to this bar. I think it was called Woody's or something.
That sounds pretty rough and ready. That'll do.
And then we're going whitewater rafting. We're going to film you tomorrow, so be careful tonight. So we went to this bar. So we're in this bar, just taking it steady. Who walk in but the entire Lions team, right? The whole squad come into this bar, and Ian McGeechan was with them. So basically, I was introduced to tequila that night, and they then had 2 days off. It was one of those nights, you know. I can't really remember too much about it, but I can remember the next day because I was whitewater rafting and filming whitewater rafting, and how I lived, I don't know. I really don't know. So it was lovely, and I love that about rugby. It's like coming home now. I'm in Wales now, and it's like Wales just goes, Chrysler, welcome, you know, and its arms out, give us a cwtch. And it's like that. And I love that.
Well, listen, whatever you said to the British and Irish Lions that night, it clearly worked because they won that series, didn't they? They won 2-1 in Australia. I mean, Jeremy Guscott scored he came out late, scored the winning try, I think, in the third test. And he obviously tells me that he won the whole Lions series on his own, really. But there we go. It was an amazing experience. Now, going back to the Principality, I obviously grew up playing rugby against Wales club games on a Friday night. We used to organise a fixture on the eve of the England-Wales game. And one year it was in England, and then the following year it was down in Wales. Debut for Wasps at Neath in a stadium called the Knoll, which is their old ground. And I don't think I've ever been as more terrified of a game of rugby in all my life, really. So, I mean, the noises coming out of the home dressing room were extraordinary. I think we ended up winning the game 10-9. I'm not sure I even touched the ball, to be honest, in the entire contest. But I always knew that there was such a passion for for rugby in Wales, understandably. And obviously, as you know, they don't mind displaying all their emotions, you know, whether, you know, the singing or the anthem. I mean, I'm half Italian and half Irish, which makes me a very dangerous Englishman, really, because I don't mind displaying my emotions either, really. Listen, and I'm sure lots of other rugby fans just love the passion that the Welsh have for their sport. Obviously, when it's in Wales, you know, they're allowed to be passionate. When the English start talking like that, you know, it's called something very, very different. But your experiences I played at the old Cardiff Arms Park, and obviously the Principality Stadium. I think we played in the first game there as well. Went pretty well for England. Will Greenwood scored a hat-trick. But obviously Wales under Warren Gatland, Sean Edwards in the last, you know, decade or so have been brilliant. You know, they always punch above their weight. I think they always seem to be so successful, even though they're only, you know, have half the numbers of any other country. What are your experiences of the Principality Stadium and of going there for the first time?
Well, the first time was quite a long time ago. I went to see Wales, Australia.
Yeah.
And I can just remember being with some of the rugby boys, some of the retired rugby boys, big like props, and Dove were the sponsor. And I can remember one of them coming out, you know, with the hospitality bags. It was like 29 of the hospitality bags going down the escalator. It's like this big.
I got enough for the entire family now.
And it's free, isn't it, Carol? So that was like my first one. But probably my favourite day, sorry to mention it, but I'm going to, was the final game in the Grand Slam 3 years ago, 2019. And I was very lucky. I was in the WRU box. And it's Ireland, Wales, Ireland. And, well, you can imagine the noise, can't you? You can only imagine. I think we were all floating about 20 feet above the air. And then England were playing Scotland immediately after. So it was on all the screens. Nobody was bothered. It was like, whatever. It was just, we were grand slamming all weekend, let's put it that way.
I bet. I mean, it's, I think we would all agree that that stadium, because of where it is, because of the fact that I guess bars open at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and you know the game doesn't kick off sometimes till sort of 3:30, 4:30, 5:30. I mean, there's nothing like being given a run up to a sporting match, is there really?
I say to my English friends, Lawrence, who haven't been down there, I go, it's like taking Twickenham or Wembley and putting it in Oxford Circus, isn't it?
Yeah.
You walk out and it's like Cardiff City Centre's just there. It's amazing. Well,
it's also the fact that everyone actually sings as well. I mean, it takes a little bit to get people singing at Twickenham. And I think it's, we'll talk about the rugby in a second, but the connection between the Welsh fans and their team is very special. I think that we used to have that connection when we were playing at Twickenham, because I don't know, the game was just very different, and I think it is important that people understand that there's an emotional side to rugby. And at Twickenham at the weekend, we saw that connection because of the sending off. And for the first time ever, the fans realised that they've got to really get behind the team, and the team responded. In Wales, that happens every game. And that's something that I think makes it very, very special. So just touching on the rugby, and before we move on to our other guests, you were obviously you've been to probably both home games, have you, this year?
I was meant to go to the Scotland one, but I had flu and I thought nobody would welcome me. But I'm off to the Wales-Italy.
Okay, and you were there for it was pouring with rain on Friday night, wasn't it? And, obviously they were given no chance, but I think they've been performing, brilliantly given the number of injuries they've had. What's your take on it all? I mean, Dan Biggers.
I'm not on here to claim any rugby expertise, but all I can say is that we were very proud of them, and they far surpassed what we thought would happen. And in that second half, particularly, when you're a Wales fan, Lawrence, kind of go, okay, right, the score at half-time, we'll kind of ignore that. Somehow or other, it's always about the second half.
Well, that sounds like if you're a Wales fan, you need reminding of the score at half-time, to be perfectly honest.
The autumn series is a bit like that. I had one day I was in the box with Ken Owens and
the sheriff.
But oh man, that was a bit wild. That was a wild day. That's for sure. But it's always, you know, a happy time really. And it is like exactly like you say. You say about Twickenham, and I saw Jamie George being interviewed after about that connection that England had with the fans on Saturday, which perhaps was more than it normally is. And he was tears when he was being interviewed, and I thought that kind of how wonderful to experience that, because I know our boys have that all the time.
Yeah. But it's important as a player. You've got to create that connection without getting a bloke sent off, you know, and it's up to them. I think hopefully the players will have learned that if they harness that power correctly, then it actually gives you another, you know, it just elevates your performance to another level. And if they could do that before the championship starts, that'd be really good, rather than wait until round 3. But we'll get on to that in a second. I think, Philip, where were you watching there? Where were you at the weekend? Were you in London? Did you manage to make it to Twickenham? Or?
So I was actually at a wedding, and I better not say unfortunately, because I'll get in trouble from the other half. But I've caught the highlights of the England game, and I've watched the Newcastle one back. But what I would say about what you just said about Twickenham needing something to get going, I think the difference when I've been to Murrayfield for internationals and also Cardiff is that at Twickenham, I'd say 75% of the fans there haven't held a rugby ball in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think if you go to other stadiums,
have you seen the cost of a ticket at Twickenham?
Well, that's exactly it.
By the way, I have to pay for them all as well. So just so we're clear,
that's exactly the point I get at. That a lot of the people that play on a Saturday afternoon or whatever, and are really part of wanting England to do well, don't actually go to Twickenham because they can't afford it or they can't get there. And I feel like in Edinburgh or Cardiff. So I was actually at a wedding, and I better not say unfortunately, because I'll get in trouble from the other half. But I've caught the highlights of the England game, and I've watched the Newcastle one back. But what I would say about what you just said about Twickenham needing something to get going, I think the difference when I've been to Murrayfield for internationals and also Cardiff is that at Twickenham, I'd say 75% of the fans there haven't held a rugby ball in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think if you go to other,
you were following. I mean, you cover a lot of things for the Evening Standard, but I'm assuming you got to cover the rugby as well. Are you a regular Twickenham goer, or were you just there for this big game?
Actually, this is the only game I've been to of the Six Nations, but I was there working on Saturday, and since we talked about the atmosphere, it was incredible. And sometimes it can be a bit of a whisper there, you know, there's not quite enough happening, but it was brilliant. It was such a great atmosphere because it was such a great game. Yeah. We had Eddie Jones beforehand saying England need to get in the faces of the Irish. Unfortunately, when Charlie Ewels took that a bit too literally after 82 seconds, you're suddenly thinking, oh my God, this is going to be a horror show, because Ireland ran a try so quickly. I think they had another one that then got disallowed, and you're thinking this could be a really, really long afternoon. But then suddenly it galvanised England, and you had all these amazing performances: Jamie George, Maro Itoje, Ellis Genge, etc. And it was just so good, this sort of near triumph over adversity, and everyone was getting so into it, and you're thinking, God, this is impossible, then improbable, then infinitely possible. England could win, and then suddenly that last 15 minutes, you sort of almost forgot that Ireland then ran so many points. It was actually quite a big defeat for England, 32-15. But it was a great, great game of rugby, great atmosphere. It was fantastic to be there.
Yeah, listen, I don't disagree with that. I hate to sort of be, sound like a plucky loser, because no one wants to come second in anything. But you have to admire that. I think what it reminded everyone is that we have some really good players. And, as you said, if they can harness that and remember those emotions before the kickoff, then they might. Well, listen, they've got an enormous test this weekend in Paris, and if last week was a test of character, this will be an even bigger test of courage and bravery. Matt, just talk to us about Ireland, though. I mean, as you said, in the end, it was it was a 3-point game with 10 minutes to go, and then you looked at the final scoreline, and even if you weren't an England fan, you'd have felt slightly sorry for them, because they put in such an effort. They probably didn't deserve to be beaten in the way that they were. What was it, 32-15 in the end or something?
Yeah, it was interesting. Johnny Sexton was talking about it in the press conference afterwards, and he was saying how, a few years ago, it's the sort of game that Ireland would have lost in that position. Suddenly it's 15-all. They're under pressure. They should be winning, but they're not. They're losing the forward battle when they've got this really established pack. But they actually kept their composure quite well, and that was what was impressive. And suddenly it just took a couple of little errors from England, and just the energy just dips towards the end. And suddenly Ireland were actually quite impressive. So Eddie Jones talked about how cohesive they were beforehand, and despite the sort of panic stations and the lots of moments that went wrong, they actually held it together and were actually incredibly impressive towards the end, weren't they?
And where are you with this England team? Because I mean, I'm the sort of, I come up with the Roy Keane sort of school of punditry where I'm, as I used to when I worked with my team, I was quite brutal with each other, as I'd expect them to be with me. You're in a results business, and you look at the tape of the game and you say, what the hell were you doing on Saturday? Because it doesn't look like you were doing your job very well. Do you know what I mean? But I mean, listen, you can't fault their character, their resilience, their courage, etc. But they've scored one try. They've scored 2 tries against Ireland, Wales, and Scotland in a total of 3 matches of rugby. And as a player, you're kind of responsible for that. You can't blame the coach. You knock on the coach's door and you say that. Have you been drinking again last night with that selection? Have you? Yeah. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to challenge England. England are nowhere near the level of Ireland and France at the moment. And I guess that happens, and it's difficult for us as England fans to take because we think we should be really good all the time. But I just feel that there's clearly a lot of potential in that side, and for some reason they're not unlocking that. When you work really hard to become an international rugby player, you don't want to arrive there and then underperform. It's about bringing out the best in yourself and the people around you. What do you think England need to do to get that going again?
I mean, it's funny you talk about the game, but I found from the start of that game to the end of the game, I'm none the wiser of what this new look England team was, because you had these 14 players and they just had this job to do, and you didn't feel there was nothing attacking. Ireland had all the attacks, all the tries, etc. You didn't feel there was enough invention there. But that's not to be too harsh, because they had a job to do to just try and hold it together. What I'd like to do is see these. Eddie Jones talked about these attacking players like Harry Randall and Marcus Smith and Freddie Stewart. You'd like to just see them let off the leash, but I don't know whether they're trusted enough to do that or what it is. But if you could just, these guys are formidable when you see them play at club level, and I appreciate there's a difference to international level. But if they're let off the leash, it'd be great to see that. Perhaps.
Do you know what there's 2 things you need in any successful team: is trust and continuity of message. And for some reason, England don't trust a group of players. The team keeps chopping and changing. The coaches keep chopping and changing, and I don't think you can build very much at all with that. Whilst you're always trying to improve as a team, you can only improve once you've learned what you've been told to do in the first place. So I think there's just a bit of patience. I played 85 times for England, and I can assure you I wasn't man of the match in every game. I played some terrible games for England, but I was given a bit of trust by the coaching group that I would come good in the end. And we did, actually. So, yeah, that would be my take on it. Philip, I've got it. Before we move on to the outstanding player of the weekend, I'm going to ask you all. I'm assuming Carol might pick someone from Friday evening, although it doesn't have to exclusively. Matt, you might pick someone from Twickenham on Saturday, but again, you don't have to. But Phil, for you, what's your take as a Newcastle Falcons fan, but also as should Radwan be in the squad? Should he be in the team, or what's your views on Eddie Jones?
So, on my views on Eddie Jones are a bit different to Radwan being in the squad, but I think if we look at the England team that have made World Cup finals, we tended to have 1 to 15 who played in their primary position that they're best for their club at. I know you get players that can play across the back row or around the backs, but at the minute we don't play with a centre at 12. We don't play with a 12 at 12. We play with a 13 at 12, and they're different positions. And similarly, we keep playing second rows in the back row and various mixtures of things where we think, is that the best person in the country in that position lining up for England? And it might be that they're their 3rd best second row, but then why are you not playing the back row is probably better than. And on the Radwan question, I think that he's almost too specialist for Eddie Jones. He can't play centre, so he's either got to start on the wing, or with the way the bench lines up, you wouldn't have him as a substitute because suddenly you can't play in the various different positions that someone like Stewart or Mayland can. So until he's the best 14 in the country, he's probably not going to play for England. And you saw in the summer what he can do against an inferior opposition. There was the
But I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the French, first time ever, are actually picking people in the right positions. They've always got outstanding players, but they used to name their team sheet, and you go, I can't quite believe they picked 9 and he's playing 10. You know what I mean? So I'm with you. Eddie Jones seems to believe in getting the best players on the field, no matter what position they play. Carol, we're going to come to you. We have this thing called outstanding, and we want you to choose an outstanding player for the weekend. You can be as biased and as one-eyed as you like and go for a Welshman. That is absolutely fine.
My favourite player.
Caught your eye?
Okay, so my favourite rugby player, and I always love it when he's selected, is Josh Adams. He's so hard and so fast. I love Josh Adams, as everybody knows. But I'm going to go with some special mentions. Josh Navidi, I thought was excellent on Friday. Biggs, obviously, some cracking. Marcus Smith, amazing. But it has to be, there can only be one, can't there, this last weekend? Johnny Sexton. It has to be Johnny Sexton.
That was a special moment. You know what? You have really showed yourself up to someone who knows everything about rugby, because that's a special moment as well. He has the moment of the weekend where he probably is playing his last Six Nations game at Twickenham, and I thought it was a lovely touch from Andy Farrell to bring him off, even though he looked super pissed off that he was substituted.
He did.
He is the ultimate competitor, and then he suddenly realised the reasons why he'd been substituted is not because he'd had a real bad stinker, but because it was an opportunity for him just to enjoy what he's created and what he's done in his rugby career. And there's very few places. I would imagine there's not that many better experiences than coming off a field having secured a bonus point victory against England, in England, at Twickenham, and going, well done. So I think that is a wonderful, wonderful choice.
Marvellous. I've got something.
Matt, where are you? Where are you going with your selection?
I'm going to go to Twickenham as well, but to the other team, not Ireland, Carol, I'm afraid, but maybe I should do. But I wanted to go with Jack Noel. I know there were other players, maybe perhaps that upstaged him in the pack, but seeing that little blue scrum cap of his when he came in to play instead of Courtney Laws in the back row was just great. And you thought, this guy comes off the wing and you think, oh, geez, this could be nasty. And against this Irish pack, I mentioned the experience, and he was just fantastic. And talking afterwards, he was buzzing. He absolutely loved the experience of getting in the mix. And people suggested, well, maybe his future's at flanker. And he said, absolutely no chance, because when he's done it, does it in training, he gets completely beaten up by these giants like Courtney Laws. So I think he was happy as a one-off. But I really, really enjoyed watching him play that position.
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more. Philip, for you, who's your outstanding player of the weekend?
I'm going to have to stick with the Falcons, aren't I? So I think he's a player that's embarrassingly good, and somehow he's never been selected for the senior international cap. It's George McGuigan. Every week, I think the reason he hasn't got selected for England might be his age. He's getting on in his career now, but he's also eligible for Ireland, and it wouldn't surprise me if Ireland get a couple of injuries if he scrapes into the Ireland squad in the next Six Nations of the World Cup, because he's under the radar. He never misses a man in the line out. He gets around the park. He saw his stats against Quins a couple of weeks ago. I was down at the stoop watching it. He just isn't a fashionable player. He doesn't have an Instagram account with hundreds of thousands of followers like some do. He just gets on with it, scrums down, makes hard yards, does what he needs to, and every week he puts in an absolute shift. And he got 2 tries at the weekend against Saracens. And Blamire seems to get in the England squad, and he's not our best hooker. It's very strange. There we are.
Well, I tell you who. Well, I don't know if not everyone spotted the young man who tried to get on the pitch and sort of join the England anthem. Maybe he thought maybe he was a better singer than he had an England shirt on and was. I mean, it takes a fair bit of bravery to run on a pitch that has more special forces soldiers holding both flags than.
I tell you what, Lawrence, I was there. I was at Twickenham when Erica Rowe ran on the pitch.
Oh my word! Now, can I say I wish I'd been there when Erica Rowe.
I was there.
Now you're talking. Now you're definitely talking. There's that lovely, iconic photo of
the policeman.
The policeman putting his helmet on. Bring me back down to earth again, Philip. I've given you an opportunity just to talk about your Folk on Falcons podcast, just to understand exactly what it covers. I'm assuming, sport and no sport like rugby it's about, every emotion, love, hate, everything in between. It just really takes you on that journey. And I guess, as being a Newcastle Falcons fan, it's no different. You've had an extraordinary journey. You've been champions. You've lived in the shadow of St James's Park and Sir John Hall's money. You robbed Wasps of their best 5 players, which made me captain of the club at the age of about 16. You've just lost one of your most famous players, Vainga Tuigamala. You've got Doddy Weir, who is just the most incredible human being who's suffering from it, MND. You've had probably the most famous rugby player in the world, Johnny Wilkinson. That's been with you for so long. Have you always been a Geordie fan? Have you been through all of those emotions?
Yeah, so I started off like every boy in the Northeast, being a Newcastle United fan, and then my grandfather, he always called them Gosforth till the day he died, but he watched them through amateur era, and then on into when they were at Kingston Park and became Newcastle Gosforth and then Newcastle Falcons eventually, and he started taking me along as a boy. And I guess when Nigan Tuigamala passed away the other week, he was my first sporting icon in rugby. He was a wonderful man, and he did a thing at the local church once, and I went along and listened to him speak, and he listed off all the Bible verses all the Bible books in under a minute. And then I saw him 3 or 4 weeks later at a Scouts football tournament, and he recognised me and came over and said hello. And that just sums up the man. And so I followed us through. I went to Twickenham, saw us beat Harlequins in the final in 2001 or 2003, and then Sale a couple of years later. I used to run on the pitch at the end of the games and get the autographs of the players he just listed off and all the rest of it. And a love affair was born. And then I started playing, and one of the lads who I played with at my local club, Ian, I did a podcast with, friends through rugby. And then we were housemates in London for a couple of years. I used to go to the away games at Jersey, and in the Championship, got Ealing Trailfinders Cup. I've just spotted. I've got next to me. We got around.
So Phil, come on now. Tell me, it's cut straight to the goss. Who is the most famous person you've had on your podcast? Because clearly I've got the most famous person today in Carol Waterman.
Before I get on to that, what I will say is, Lawrence, when I used to come home from school on I think it was a Wednesdays, my mum worked, I'd go to school to my grandparents, grandfather I just mentioned, and he used to dust off the VHSs, and I'd see one of my icons on TV, and he used to put Carol Waterman's Countdown on, so I'm delighted to be invited on and see Carol Waterman face to face, because we used to do the numbers round together, and now I'm an accountant. Obviously did the job, Carol, thank you.
That's sweet. Because Lawrence, you used to watch Countdown, didn't you?
You did, yeah, all the time. Obviously, I've just finished my rugby career 12 years ago. So everyone said, "What do you do when you finish playing rugby?" Well, you learn to read and write again for a start, and you certainly learn to count. But no, we used to love watching Countdown, and I genuinely mean that in the way when we finished training, it was a good little hour, and just the time to relax. I was going to ask you, Carol, before go back to Phil, when you did that interview for Countdown and you got the job. I'm assuming you're obviously overqualified for the job, but do they ask you any special quiz questions to see if you?
No, it was literally, it comes from a French program called Des Chiffres des Lettres. And so all they did was they put the VHSs in, and John Mead, who was a proper Yorkshireman, all right then, borders, come on, sit down, watch this, get the answer, you got the job. Literally, he put this VHS in, and it was a numbers game, but in French. Yeah. And it's 1982, and I went, "Yeah, I got that." He went, "What do you mean you got it?" I went, "I've got it," before the music started. "Oh, you got it. All right, you got the job then." Gave me three maths questions like that, and that was it. I got the job. Never went in the studio, never in front of a camera, no screen test whatsoever.
Just a natural. Well, Phil, if we go back to the maths that's happening up at Newcastle, there's a lot of frustration on the terraces at the minute. You obviously got your ear close to the ground. I presume you get to interview the players, you get them on as guests. What are the fans thinking about the current setup at the minute?
Yeah, so I spoke to Matt Thompson about 3 or 4 weeks ago, former player who played against you a few times, I'm sure, Lawrence.
Well, if he played in the Betamax video era, then it would have been against me. Yes, that's quite correct.
He was around the turn of the millennium. His father was Dave Thompson, the chairman, and he was a hooker. And we had him on a few weeks ago, and we were talking about various things. And one of the key things he said was that at the minute they get, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but he basically said 6,000 is breaking even point for the club, and 9,000 is when they can really start getting the money in and pushing the salary cap. And at the minute, our attendance this season are 3,000-5,000, probably on a good timing. matches played, but we're about 5,500. And part of the issue that is we just don't play exciting rugby at the minute. I think as far as the pack go, we've probably got a pack that's just as good as any in the league, if not better than quite a few. We've got Hayden Wood at fly half, who looks like he's going to be a very good player. And then we've got good outside backs as well, but it's the inside three quarters where we've got the issue.
I mean, I hate to say it, but rugby is becoming a bit like football. If you look at the football table, the 4 teams that spend the most amount of money are at the top of the English Premier League. And, as well as, apparently they're all super coaches. I'm sure they are, but super coaches need super players to win things, don't they, really? So, and if you look at rugby, if you look at the current Gallagher Premiership, there is always the odd exception to the rule, and you have a good season and you have a run of no injuries, etc. But if you look at the table, I'd roughly imagine, if you look at the wage bill of all those teams, I bet it would be about the same order.
Well, if we look at the wage bill of 1 and 2 in the league, Saracens and Leicester, and we've got a few questions to answer in the past, haven't they? So you'd probably bang on the money with that.
Come on, Phil, don't be controversial. I've managed to avoid controversy my entire career. Now, listen, we wish you all the very best. If I'm ever in the northeast, please feel free to get me on the show. But we're going to hand over to Matt, because we try and give our listeners a little bit of rugby trivia that they didn't know before the show, and probably that most of us didn't know before the show. So it's over the line or in the bin, and we're going to let Carol go first. But I think Matt, it's over to you.
Yes, so it's the true or false. You've got to decide whether it's over the line,
okay,
it's true, or alternatively it's false and it's in the bin. So today's fact is Wales fly half Dan Biggar scored all of his side's points against France. But back in the day, we wind the clock back a few years, he used to have a pre-kicking routine that used to be nicknamed, yeah, that's perfect, you're absolutely natural, that's nicknamed the Big Arena, which is a homage to the 1990s hit, the Macarena. Now, is that over the line or in the bin? I was going to say, actually, maybe we don't go with Carol first because she's looking knowledgeable.
Well, I know the answer to that.
Okay, well, we won't go with Carol first. We'll go with Philip first then, because you've got the advanced Wales knowledge.
Well, I actually was once sitting in a pub in Victoria Station. You've got a sports bar. Was it Victoria Palace? There's a sports bar above it. And when we got beaten by Wales in the World Cup last time, I was sitting there somewhat inebriated as Dan Biggar kept slotting the posts with my friends doing all this sort of thing. And we called it the Dan Biggar Shuffle. And then, I don't know if you remember the Wall Street Shuffle, song from way back. Can't remember where we ended up that night, but that came on, and then we started the Wall Street Shuffle. We started doing the Dan Biggar Shuffle, and all these dance moves came out.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to say that it's probably going to be true because of Carol's reaction earlier on.
Lawrence, we better go with you second then.
Well, listen, I mean, I'm always in the bin, so I'm going to go over the line, right? So he's actually. Whisper this, but he's actually one of my favourite players, and he's Welsh. I'm allowed to like people outside of England, and I just think I love Dan Biggar. I just think he's so competitive, and he's so humble as well. You see some, like all us rugby players, he does 1 or 2 annoying things on the field, but you can't be classed as very good if you don't do annoying things that upset people. But he's just a special player, and he can dance clearly as well. Obviously he'd have to speed up his little shuffle now because you're only allowed a minute, aren't you? Really? So, but he's been magnificent. I'm so pleased he's captain of Wales. I thought his performance against Scotland was magnificent, and I'm going to go. What did I say? Over the line. But Carol can give us the real answer because she knows.
I know. Well, I know it's over the line. And we have, and you should get him on your podcast, actually, a little boy in Wales who's called Rocco. And I did a show with Scotty Bach, and we had Rocco on. He does these he's only like 6 years old now, something like that. And he was 4 or 5 years old. And he does all the impressions of Welsh rugby players. And they're brilliant, like Adam Beard and all sorts of different. And Adam Jones and Biggs he does, and he would always do this whole thing, and then they film him, he's running up, he's kicking the ball and everything, he does it, and he's brilliant. You should get him on. He's fantastic. He's just sweet. He's the sweetest little thing. So because of Rocco, age 6, from Neath probably, I would say that it's over the line.
So it's going to be a big surprise to all of you, but you're spot on with the answer. Yeah, the Big Arena was 2015 Rugby World Cup phenomenon, I think, when he took over kicking duties. And there's this ridiculous routine that my son used to do and used to love, that actually he's sort of diminished. It doesn't seem to happen so much, but this jittery routine obviously did some effect because he scored 56 points in that World Cup. So anyway, you're all spot on.
Brilliant. What do we win, Matt? Do we win? We win.
Just my praise. Is that enough?
Well, yeah, maybe
that's all I've got. That's all I've got.
Maybe we win a day out in the green room at Twickenham on the next rugby game. Listen, we're going to talk about the last round of the Six Nations before we let everyone go. But Carol, before we talk about Wales, Italy, which you're going to, which is going to be another fantastic game. What's your? Well, I mean, obviously you grew up watching, men's rugby predominantly, but the women's game is growing every single day. Just a phenomenal growth of women's rugby. England have a very good side. So do many of the other Six Nations. I mean, what's your take on that? It's just, it's fantastic now that the game is where it is. We just need to get more fans in the stadium watching them, don't we? Really?
Yeah, and I think because I have this radio show on BBC Radio Wales, and I'm always talking to some of the girls who play for Wales women, and I've always been a big fan of theirs, and it was a big step forward for the Wales women this year because the WRU have given, I think it's 12 of them full-time
professional contracts,
because a lot of them, if they were living up in Manchester or in North Wales or wherever, would have to come down to Cardiff twice a week, literally drive 4 hours there, train 4 hours back. And keep a full-time job down, and it's not against the English women at all. It's just that it's wonderful now that some of them can properly concentrate on being rugby players. So I think once you see that sort of fairer competition starting, I think it's really growing. I love to watch it. I really love to watch it. I love the girls. I love them.
No, listen, I agree. They've got the Women's World Cup coming up. I mean, I think the average in England, certainly, I'm sure it's probably even less in Wales. I think the full-time women get £35,000 a year as a contract. I mean, that's it's sort of derisory, isn't it? Really, with all due respect, England men's team get £25,000 each for playing for England at the weekend. Win or lose. So there you go. So there's a long way to go. It's not just about money, I accept that, but I'm sure we'll see that development grow and grow and grow. So Wales, Italy, obviously, sometimes you go with your mates, sometimes you get an invite from the WRU and you do it the corporate way. What's in store this weekend?
It's with my mates, and I'm taking my daughter, Katie. So she's 29 now, and she's just got a PhD from Cambridge, and she's never been to the Principality before. So she's going to come.
Oh.
So my
have you told her to keep away from all those rugby players? Have you?
I think she'd suit one or two, actually. But when I grew up in North Wales, you'll like this, Lawrence, my stepfather in Denbigh was Italian. He'd been a prisoner of war.
Yeah, there's a big Italian community in Wales, actually.
First language Italian, second language Welsh, third language English. And Gabriele Arezzi, and he swore every third word, and I absolutely adored him. So, most of my childhood was growing up in an Italian household in Wales. So Wales, Italy is very special to me.
Well, can you imagine? It's like a singing contest, Wales, Italy. I mean, the Italian anthem is probably everyone's favourite anthem, and it goes on for about 3 hours, but it is everyone's favourite anthem. They all start crying and they all start getting very emotional. Because of my father's Italian, birth, I was given the opportunity to play for Italy when I was 18. And the game was very amateur. They flew me by private jet over to Milan. They showed me around the flat that they were going to give me, the place at Milan University. They showed me the salary they were going to pay me. And I was thinking, I'm not sure anyone, you're allowed to pay anyone any salary. They said, Lawrence, this is Italy, it's no problem. I mean, of course, we have to pay you something like this. So anyway, my father was like, where do we sign? And then I went to watch a game, and it was a club game in Italy, and we're talking about 1991 here. And David Campese was playing for this club, Milan. And I mean, it was a shit show. I think he touched the ball once. I mean, it was just a mess. I was thinking, I can't play. I could never play. But if I'd have accepted that, then obviously, I'm not, it would have been amazing. I probably would have been a bit like Sergio Parisi, played for about 150 years and won one game, so it would have been fantastic. But I did captain England against Italy in the first ever game in the Six Nations in Rome in 2000. And I was so proud. It was in that little small Flaminio Stadium. And I never forget, I took my father over there and I said, Dad, you're going to be the official translator for the post-match reception, even though I can speak reasonably good Italian. Anyway, we won 85-0, which was a bit of a disappointment for the Italians. But the post-match reception was the best post-match reception we've ever been to in the Six Nations. It was a beautiful palace on the top of the hill. And I got up and I made my speech and I started by saying, welcome to the Six Nations, and this is the most amazing, post-match reception we've ever seen in our lives. And my dad then got up. He said, "My son just wants to say," yeah. And I said, "No, Dad, in Italian." I said, you're translating my English into English at the moment with an Italian accent. And of course, everyone burst out laughing, but I think, listen, Italy have still got a long way to go, but I can't see them getting their first victory for a very long time down in the Principality Stadium. And listen, Carol, I'm sure your daughter will have the most amazing time. You'll introduce her to all that singing, and everyone remembers their first experience. Matt, Ireland against Scotland, France against England. We're going to talk about these games both collectively, really, because they sort of almost are connected. England have got a real task on their hands. We used to, all the Celtic sides used to make a habit of ruining England's Grand Slam. So I hope England might have a little bit of an idea about how to ruin the French. But, there's one thing going to play in France, when you're never quite sure what's happening, but the French look a very, very strong outfit now, don't they? Can you see England getting anything out of that game?
Yeah, I think all the sensibilities, if you're just thinking with your head, all the sensibilities are France will win. They're great. They've got such an amazing caliber of players. They're so nicely attack-minded. And now with Sean Edwards, that defence is just incredible. We saw it. Carol would have seen it at close quarters in Cardiff. But then there's that Grand Slam element, and the French players won't be oblivious to that fact that suddenly the Grand Slam's there, the expectation, the pressure of the week builds, and that can make teams crumble. I'm not saying France will, but that's the one part. And so if England do get in the faces again, they're intense, and perhaps use some of that high ball game that Wales did to put the French under pressure, that's a possibility that they could win there. If Ireland win, that puts further pressure on France in the earlier games. So I don't know, but realistically, you'd think France would win that game reasonably comfortably in Paris.
Phil, I'll come to you. I'm assuming you'll be tuning in for France England late at night. Just talk about Ireland Scotland for a second. Probably be Johnny Sexton's last game everywhere now. He's done that at Twickenham, but Scotland, having started the tournament so well, they're really up against it. There's a bit of, even though everyone says England's their big game, which it is because everyone hates the English, there's a bit of niggle between Ireland and Scotland. Certainly when I talk to the Irish players, I don't know why, but there is that little bit of beef and that little bit of niggle. So how do you see this one going?
I've got to see Ireland winning that one. Everyone talks about the first game of the Six Nations and Scotland doing us over. I think that Scotland didn't play particularly well there. They played reasonably well, but I think a lot of it was that every time England got the ball in their attacking third of the pitch, we kicked it to them or messed it up ourselves, and then Scotland clinically took their chances when they had them. And I think that Scotland, the Six Nations, have been very respectable, but I think that probably the last couple of years they've actually been better than this year. And I think Ireland, the team in form, they're just going to blow them away, probably get quite a handsome scoreline, I actually think.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, listen, I'm assuming if we ask you to predict all three, okay, so we're going to say Wales are going to win. I think even I will say that, no problem at all. We think a home win for Ireland against Scotland. And Carol, can we see a French Grand Slam? Do we all think a French Grand Slam?
This is not anti-English, but I kind of want the French to have a Grand Slam, to be honest, because we've got the World Cup there, and I think it's just wonderful. Next year, and I think that's. I think. Yeah.
And they haven't won They haven't won the Six Nations title for about 12 years. I think it might even be longer than that. It seems utterly incredible that they haven't done that. And Wales are the current champions, and it seems quite fitting that they pass that over to the French. So
I think it would be nice. Although I have to say, on Friday night, every time there was a shot of Sean Edwards coming up on the big screen, it was like we were all like,
you know what? he smiles on the inside. I mean, you know, he's the nicest. I mean, I worked with him for many, many years. He's just the nicest guy in the world. Do you know what? He wrote a foreword to my book, my autobiography. I'm sure you all bought it. I'm sure you all bought it and coloured it in. But it's called In the Blood. And I asked him to write the foreword. And of course, you know, having worked and played together for many years, he wrote it. And when you read it, I had no idea that. I was driving to Wasps one day, and there was a lady on the side of the road, and her car had broken down, and she was having real issues, you know, changing the tyre. So thank God I stopped, right? Because I stopped and helped this woman, and I changed her tyre, and I got her back on the road, and it turns out it was Sean Edwards' mum. And I think in the gist of the foreword was, you know, he mentioned everything about, you know, playing and coaching me, etc. And he said, and do you know what? He said, if someone looks after your mum and helps your mum, you're never going to forget that, are you really? So, and I was thinking to myself, thank God I pulled over. Otherwise, he'd have killed me, wouldn't he? Really? So he's a very special man, and I've said this many times before. I said when Eddie Jones decides to, you know, to take the boarding pass and go back to Australia, which he will do at some point, I'm sure. I want Andy Farrell back from Ireland. Thank you very much. I want Sean Edwards back from France, and I might even go and join them, and we can see what we can do with England.
Oh wow!
It would be amazing. Listen, I wish you all the most incredible weekends wherever you're going to be watching. Thank you all for joining me on the Rugby podcast. So a huge thank you to Carol, to Philip, and to Matt. Don't forget to give us the podcast a like, subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and thank you for listening. See you all next week. Thanks, guys.